I enjoy John. I just enjoy this. I love this book. Every time I study it, I find something more and more new nuances to it. So, Mark and I were talking, and he was asking what I might do for next year. One thing about next year is that the first half of September is going to be out because I'll be in Kenya. And I'm thinking about doing something along the lines of the temple. Where Jesus at the end of the thing, in fact, John will talk about when he's basically the temple, destroy the temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And just the whole history that goes behind it, going all the way back to David, who was there for the temple, and really going before that, going to the Ark of the Covenant, where God actually instructs. Just to give a little tidbit for next time. It's so interesting. I'm just learning this, that he instructs his people to build a tabernacle, and he said, "I will be there." He also, in the Old Testament, said, the last thing you want is a king, right? And you go to the book of Judges, and what God wanted was a theocracy. So basically, when you go to Judges, it's all about, here's the law of God, and we'll set up judges. And actually, judges came around to fix things that were broken all the time. But it was, let's be a theocracy. I'm your God. Here's the laws. Abide by them. Don't have a king that will rule over you, because if you give the king that much power, he's going to usurp your independence and all of that, and it won't be good for you. But the people just wanted a king. And finally God gave them a king. And it's very interesting, is what God wanted, what the people wanted, God finally gave, but God then takes that, and you've got 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then the 2 Chronicle books that speak of that whole history of the king, which is a huge history of the Jewish people, and how the kings just really messed things up for the most part, not always. And God actually connects to David, the king, and then when you look at the Old Testament, when Jesus comes as king, he comes as the king as truly an anti-type of the kings of the past, and he really basically becomes the king. And the whole contrast between what he sets up in the New Testament about his kingdom, a lot of people look at the Bible and say, well, this says this in the Bible, and that doesn't make sense. Well, you got to understand, when the Bible speaks of history, it doesn't necessarily mean what's being written in the Bible is the right thing for people to do. And the same thing is with the temple. The temple is something that God didn't necessarily really want for the people, but it was requested, and there were pagan influence actually attached to that. All right? Which is very interesting. Anyway, would you like something like that? And if there's something that you think, if there's other thoughts that you might think, hey, no, we ought to do this or that, that's fine, because I think I might just develop this on my own during the summer. The only thing is, I'm not going to start until probably mid-October, and then we'll go October for a little bit, and then go in the spring and spread it out. We might, because it would be unwise for me to start any earlier, because I'll be in September. September's pretty wiped out, so maybe end of September, maybe I can start. Does that sound like something? Would you be interested in that, honestly?
Yeah.
Because we can do something else, something more contemporary, something more about topical issues, if you want to do something like that too.
I had a dream the other night. Can we talk about that?
Say what?
I said I had a dream the other night. Can we talk about that?
About that? Oh.
No, we don't do dreams.
With dreams and things like that. We actually did one by the. How did we? Actually, you're a whole different group than what used to be. We did one on dreams and things like that. There's actually a life like that. There's one that talks about dreams and prophecies and stuff. Sound good? All right, so today, quite honestly, is anticlimactic. If you read chapter 21, did it feel that way? It feels like chapter 19 and 20 was the, if you go to, you know how movies go, and there's the move up, and then there's the climactic, and then there's the epilogue. That kind of ties up loose ends. And that's what 21 is in John. It's not the climactic part. The climactic part was 19 and 20, the crucifixion, the resurrection, right? And you know, I almost get this feeling like if I were going to do a movie on John, I would have that happen, and it would be very dramatic. The whole thing was appearing to Thomas, and Thomas just saying, "My Lord and my God," right? And then Jesus saying, "Blessed are you, blessed are those who haven't seen me." You know how we went over that last week. I hope I explained myself well there. Why are we blessed not to have seen and believe? And then the next scene would be, I would have it where the next scene I would go to the sea calm and birds singing or something. You know, this is now where John said, or Jesus says to the disciples, "Go to Galilee now. You got to go from Jerusalem. You got to go north to Galilee. I'll see you there, and then I'll start giving you my instructions." And he's going to spend 40 days with him. Okay? But it's an epilogue. How many of you have ever seen the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings? You know, the Lord of the Rings, if you put that whole thing together, and if you get the extended version, we're talking 14 hours, maybe 15 hours?
About 13 and a half.
Maybe 13 and a half hours. And it's very interesting when you watch the third one. There's so much built up in that movie for all those hours that when they get to the climax and at the end where the ring has to be destroyed, the epilogue is forever.
Yes.
And it has to be. The epilogue has to be forever because you just have to wind down, right? So what's going to happen to Frodo now that his mission is over? What's going to happen to Sam? You know, Sam's going to become the family man, you know, but what's going to happen to Frodo? He's going to go off into the sunset. He's going to die, you know. And that's kind of the thing here. That's what chapter 21 is. So I didn't want to tell you that last week, but that was we're afraid we weren't going to come back.
Next week we'll study the anticlimax.
Yeah, that's going to be anticlimactic. We'll come anyway. Yeah. Okay? So that's basically what's going on. Huh?
Just to prove it.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So, I like that last part too. You know, John, it's really interesting when John writes, and you can tell he earnestly wants you to believe, doesn't it? You know, look at verse 30. Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. That's the point, and that's the theme of the gospel. Right? We're going to go over all the themes at the end of this thing, but that's his major theme. I'm writing this so that you could believe what I've seen. And then, epilogue, next scene in the movie. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Didymus, the twin, Nathanael, from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, the two other disciples were together. And what are they doing? They're sitting and they're waiting for Jesus. And they're kind of back home, right? You know, they did. And what are they going to do? Peter goes, while I'm waiting, what I'm going to do? What I always do. I'm going to fish. That's his life. That was his occupation. I'm going fishing. We'll go with you. But we ain't got anything else to do either while we wait for Jesus. So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Right? And one of the kids asked me, it was very interesting, we're kind of coinciding with when I'm teaching the kids in the morning, why didn't they know it was Jesus? Well, why didn't they know it was Jesus? Well, it's not like he was glowing, right? you know this is the resurrected Christ. It's kind of similar to the on the road of Emmaus when the two disciples, probably part of the 72, not the 12, but the two were walking along, they're downcast, and Jesus shows up. What were you guys talking about? Oh, haven't you heard, right? They didn't realize who he was until the breaking of bread later on. But they would have seen him off the shore. We'll find out later, they're about 100 yards away from the shore. So they see a human being there. So they don't know it's Jesus. Now, at what point do you think Peter begins to say, this is deja vu? Because this all happened before, right? This all happened at the beginning of the ministry, same kind of thing. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. How many of you fish? All right. I have more days than I would like to admit where you're out fishing, right? And you're coming in and there's fishermen coming out. How'd you do? Yeah, and you didn't catch anything. So not a good day. Don't ask me. Well, we caught about 12 of them over here. And you skunk. It's kind of not a good feeling. No, they answered. So he said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. Is there something the light going on? Ding. Because that's exactly what happened at the very beginning of his ministry. Same thing. And remember Peter's response after they caught all the fish the first time? He told Jesus what? Go away from me. I'm a sinful human being. And when he saw the first miracle of catching a fish, Peter says, stay away from me. I'm contaminated. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, so John said to Peter, it's the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say it, it is the Lord, he wrapped the outer garments around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples had to do all the work. Right? While towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals, and there were already fish on it, and some bread. What does this remind you of a little bit in the Gospel of John? There's already bread and fish. Do you think? I made you wonder. Yeah, feeding the 5,000. Now, is it possible that Jesus went fishing, the resurrected Christ went fishing and caught one or two? What do you think? I mean, I'm wondering. Or do you think the resurrected Jesus just, yes, but it's bread and fish, right? The same two things. So he's providing them bread and fish again. Right? What's the difference between them catching them out there, where Jesus congregates the fish in one area so that they can catch them, right? And back in chapter 6, what did he do? He took a few fish and what? Multiplied them, and the bread as well. There seems to be a parallel here. Interesting. He's still what? And this is interesting to me because if you listen to C.S. Lewis talk about since I heard this, I made my distinction of miracles the same way C.S. Lewis does. And he basically says, okay, is the birth of a baby a miracle? We often say that, don't we? When I saw my baby being born, it's a miracle. Lewis would say, I understand why you think it's a miracle, and it is in a sense a miracle because God did all of it. It was all divinely done through people, right? But he would suggest that's not a miracle because it's still part of the natural order of things. Okay? So in one sense, he's not saying don't get rid of it's a miracle. Don't let that be. Don't get worried with this. It is a miracle. I mean, to watch a baby be born, I still don't understand how that works. I still don't understand that.
And that there's a new soul.
There's a new soul created, and it is definitely the work of God here, right? Using the sperm and the egg in the womb. But the point of what Luther says is we can medically say, this is what happens. Okay? So his thing is, so there is a natural order to things that really still amaze us. Right? And he says the miracle is, when there's a miracle, it bypasses the natural order that we are used to. Right? So the feeding of 5,000 was definitely a miracle because you could maybe suggest that it's a miracle that God continues to feed us fish all the time. And we know how that works. It's kind of the same thing that's happened here. The fisherman catches the fish, right? Well, how did the fish come about? Well, the fish spawned and produced the fish, right? So there's the production of fish is happening all the time. The production of wheat is happening all the time in order to produce bread, right? And there's this natural order by which God, and you call it a miracle, and you can, but he's saying, in the Bible, it would be like, let's say, when we have a couple of fish that are outside of the water and dead, and then God takes those two fish, Jesus takes those fish and all of a sudden produces a bunch of fish, bypassing all aspects of the natural order by which people do fish. That is a miracle. Same thing with the bread. Right? Either way, though, does God provide us with our food? Yes, and that's why we thank God for the food that we have, because it's part of the fourth petition, and I'll give us this day our daily bread. God provides us all that stuff. And in one sense it's miraculous, in another sense it's not, right? So here, God is still doing it. Is this natural or miracle? Well, I guess in one sense it has to be a miracle because somehow God congregated the fish in one spot. They themselves went out fishing and they were unable to catch a fish. Jesus says, throw it over on the right side. So that means God what? Congregated the fish so that it could happen. So there's a miraculous aspect to that, right? I would say.
Do you think that that didn't ring a bell with them?
Mm-hmm. I think it did.
I would think that they would think, who is this guy? I mean, that's exactly what...
Yeah, according to text, John, it's Jesus. Here we go again. Here we go again. At the end of the ministry, he's doing the same thing. Yeah.
You think there was symbolism to it being on the right side?
That's a good question, too. What kind of symbolism are you thinking? Like right
Well,
now?
I'm going back to the three crosses, and the right and the left.
Yeah.
Or in his righteousness as a resurrected being.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we're catching on
Mm-hmm.
to the many lessons. It's kind of like hindsight's 20/20. You know, after you have a little more explanation what you went through, it makes better sense than when you were going through it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think he's saying, I'm still the same, but I'm doing it differently, in a different presence.
I think there's something to that. That's exactly it. That's where I'm kind of going, actually. You know, I'm thinking right hand of God, the Father, Jesus. I don't know, maybe that too, but that's kind of where I'm going.
Way to go.
Yeah, because
Those haven't any more study.
no, but now, let's make that to the practical
Maybe I've been
reality.
paying attention.
Now, that's the practical thing, though, right? How often do I want God's intervention to be in a certain way? But God is always providing for me through the natural order of things, and that's kind of cool, isn't it? He puts me in a position to where I know. I have a buddy of mine way back when I worked for Prudential. He and I became buddies, and he and I enjoyed going canoeing and fishing, and we would take trips on canoes where we would backpack and go into the interior of some place like Canada, and all we had was what was on our backs. And he did it by himself all the time. The guy was a mountain man. He was a Greek mountain man. He wasn't really a mountain man. He went and did this stuff by himself. And what was cool is that he knew where the fish were. And there were people out there fishing, and they were getting, this is the other side of the story, but he knew where the fish were. And we would go for days canoeing, and he goes, here it is, Dave, right over there. Let's go over there. I caught more walleye and pike, and they God's provision, right? God provided for us. I could sense that it was a miracle, but it was really Ernie, my buddy, who knew where they were. But it was predictable, right? And that's good for us, isn't it? That God provides to us and it's predictable.
Well, it's definitely trust building.
It's trust building for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But the miracle is such that he could do it if he wants to, right? And he can do it for his purpose, correct?
But he also gives you the sense that he can hold back when needed, when it's more important for you to make your self-discovery.
Yes. Yes. And not to necessarily expect the miracle when you think you need it. But the miracle in the end, doesn't that fit with what John is saying throughout the whole thing? Is that, he's always pushing us, remember the rubber band, he's always pushing us to the miracle of the cross. And we just had it in 1920, right? And what he's saying too is the greatest miracle, the resurrection of Christ, is the greatest miracle. Your greatest miracle is baptism connected to the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Therein, you got it, and you're going to have it. You're going to have the best miracle, and you need it, because ultimately God does have to pull you out of there, right? And he has to do it not naturally in a sense. It has to be a divine intervention, right? He comes in, he dies for you, and he resurrects for you in order to bring you home, right? So ultimately, we do have the ultimate miracle. But on the way, there's a lot of the natural providence of God that comes to us, right? You see what's going on here? And here I had the sense of where he's doing a miracle. It's not quite the miracle of chapter 6, but he's still saying, through your natural way in which you guys always fish and catch fish, just throw it on the right side, and bam, I'm going to provide for you. So now they're hauling it out of the sea, and all these fish are fish that are in there, and they spawn. They didn't get produced, never touching water, like chapter 6. Does that make sense? So God got you covered. And naturally, for the vast majority of your life, if not the entire, because I've never seen a miracle not like this. You may have, people say they have, and I believe that could happen. From my own personal experience, I can't say I necessarily, had anything like this, but I had it. But I have had the natural process by which God provides for me all the time. But I do have the greatest miracle. You get a lot.
Yeah, I do actually. Just it kind of goes sort of along with, because it says John, they got 153 fish, and Jesus already had some fish cooking.
Right.
Well, my thought is, could he have let them catch all the fish, and then knowing that they could have sold them and continued the ministry, and that he provided another way for them?
Well, definitely they would have.
I know I don't want to assume too much.
No, they did. Well, there is. No, I think there's a because the first time when they went out, they did it because this was their livelihood. This is how they made their money, right? Yeah. And they caught a bunch and they could take it to market now and sell the fish. Yeah. And definitely they would have taken a few more to finish breakfast. It seems like it's like, hey, take some, because we're not there, we didn't read it yet, but take some fish and let's have breakfast together. Sure. But they would have.
So in another way, provide for them twice.
Yeah, sure.
Physical, eat and then financially down the road.
Yeah,
and then continue the ministry. Brandon probably that.
Yeah. All right. Oh, so they very interesting. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because it was so large. And the disciple whom Jesus loved said, "It's the Lord." Oh no, I'm back. It's Lord Jesus. He jumps in. When they landed, they saw fire. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you caught." Okay. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of 153. Does anybody here, did you study anything and have anything in regards to why John recorded 153?
That would have been John was the eyewitness to everything.
I know. Why would he care to say 153?
Study Bible said it documents the extraordinary,
Amount, maybe?
extraordinary aspect of the event. So apparently that was
Just to show that.
not a normal catch.
That's all I was able to find. I don't know, it bugs me that he said 133. I'm like, does that mean anything? Because John was big with numbers, but I.
Well, it would, like a farmer, let's say they normally get 100 bushels an acre and all of a sudden they get 200. It would mean maybe something to the fishermen that,
Good point.
wait, this doesn't happen. You know, 75 is the most you ever get, and this
Yes,
is double
okay.
that or something.
That's good, okay.
It might not mean nothing to the average Joe,
Mhm.
but it would to the fisher, to
Good. That
tradesman.
makes sense, because the emphasis that goes to this is the fact that the nets were not what?
Not broken.
Broken. Right, very good. That makes a lot of sense. So it was full of large fish, 153.
But large fish would have broken the net.
Right, and that's what he's alluding to. So that makes all the sense in the world, thank you. But even with so many, see, I'm always looking for something like, what's the numbers mean? You know, does John get into that? That makes sense. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Okay? You guys find out anything about why John said that? The gospel net will not tear, as many that believe is as many that will hold. I read that one of the thoughts is that, because remember in the first time when Jesus says, it says to Peter, when he caught all those fish, and he says, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So Jesus makes that correlation between fishing for fish and then fishing for men. That it's assumed that, in other words, the gospel that goes out in the world, it won't tear. If everybody converted to Christianity, it's not going to tear. That's kind of the idea. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Have any of you had breakfast, fish for breakfast? Out on the fire. Me and Ernie, go back to me and Ernie, that's what he would do.
I
Yes.
haven't thought about the 153, and I don't know if this is true, because it would probably take quite a bit of research to find out if it was. These disciples that were there each went and planted so many churches, and I wonder how many total churches would have been planted from their preaching.
Are you just coming up with this, or did you read about this?
I did not read this. I'm wondering if
All
that.
right. You know what I would do, Carly? Research it, because if you come up with this, you're going to be the first one probably. Because that would be awesome. I mean, if you found out there was 153 exact, then that would be awesome. Okay, whoa,
I'm going to do that.
wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
All right. Come have breakfast. None of the disciples dared to ask, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. All right? Everyone's convinced. Even Thomas. Thomas ain't saying anything. He had his episode. He's not going to be humiliated again. Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. Now, one thing that we have to understand, and John, I mentioned this before, I believe, earlier on. Remember we said that John was the last of the 4 Gospels that were written, and according to Dr. Weinrich and others, but I remember hearing Weinrich talk about his belief about the whole sacrament that people talk about. Well, John's the one that doesn't have an emphasis on, say, the words of institution and the sacrament and everything. But Weinrich would argue there's sacrament all over the place in the Gospel of John. And John is assuming you know the Synoptic Gospels, the other 3, and he doesn't want to repeat himself. Now, this is the breaking the bread, isn't it? And we have the breaking the bread in other places, like in chapter 6. when you have, you know how important it is for us. Isn't it important for us, as especially families, to have dinner together? And they even do studies. They say if you as a family are too busy not to have dinner together at least 3 times a week, you're not doing your family a service. That breaking bread together and just having conversation within the family is extremely important for the development of the children and their security and confidence and all of that. And it was no different back then. In fact, for them, breaking the bread was extremely important. And so the whole idea of having communion, the feast, having all the feasts of the Old Testament and having the meal together, breaking bread is extremely important. So whenever this is mentioned, there is the idea of fellowship going on here. Isn't that what's going to happen now? Jesus invites them to a meal, and they eat, having bread and fish, right? Back in chapter 6, he was saying, okay, now that your bellies are full, I am the bread of life, right? There's sacramentality all the way through John. When he finally says, unless you eat my body, drink my blood, you have no part in me. He's so close to just saying, that's so close to being sacramental. Now, Luther didn't think it was sacramental. Sometimes I wonder if he was wrong. I don't know. It's so close to Catholics say that's sacramental. Anyway, there's a big discussion at seminary. That's a big discussion amongst the professors. That was so much fun to watch the professors disagree over that. I always tended towards the sacramental guys, but that's what's happening here. There's fellowship, and now when there's fellowship, then what's going to happen? He's going to have fellowship with them, and he's going to deal particularly with who? Peter. Okay? And what's interesting is Jesus is going to, he has to deal with Peter. He can't leave this alone. And what he's not going to do when we read this, he's not trying to say, I told you so. Jesus is not being like that to Peter. But Jesus has to have this conversation with Peter in order to what? Prepare him to be, yes, his job as an apostle. They have to clear the air. Okay? And it's interesting they're doing it amongst the meal. I think that's all part of the understanding of fellowship and the correction that's going to have to come to Peter. Very interesting to me. Okay? And it says that this is now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to them. Yeah, the first Sunday, the second Sunday, and now go to Galilee, and now Jesus has appeared to them again. And now he's going to spend a considerable amount of time with his apostles before he ascends back to his Father and has the Holy Spirit come 10 days later so that the church may grow as it has this very day.
And it's just significant that he eats with them because especially in light of when he talks about Peter, because he's still eating with sinners. Mm-hmm. This is him post-resurrection in his fully glorified state, coming back to eat with sinners, and he cooks for them. Mm-hmm. And he's serving them the meal.
That's a good point. He's the host, isn't he? Yes, very good, very good. Mm-hmm.
And I think that he's teaching them how to do ministry, because later in Acts, I forget which verse it was, I was looking for it, so I can't find it, where it says they were breaking bread together and they were worshiping, right. All the things that they do as the church when the church begins.
That's right. Yeah, and that was our study today with the kids. We talked about, we were reading that very passage. Yeah, very good insight. Yeah. So when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? Now, there's 2 Greek words, there's actually 3, but 2 Greek words, phileo and agape. And some scholars make a big deal out of this, and some of them say you shouldn't. I think that when John is writing and he's using the same, remember back in the prologue, I think I mentioned that John uses 2 different words for what's the word? No. He uses 2 different words. I'm trying to remember what the actual interpretation is. In the beginning was the Word, God, and then all the times that the word was. In your English, if you read any one of your translations, you're going to read the word was. And that's the word aim. And when it was applied to Jesus, that's the word that John chose. When we get to that one part where there was a man by the name of John, he uses the word egeneto. Aim is more the infinite was. That's why you get the sense of God. There always was. Egeneto, and if you're going to use those two within the same point, you're making the same point, you're using the word was, you're going to change the Greek word, I would suggest you're making a point. So why don't we just continue to use the same word? All right? I don't know if you get this. I see your face like you're drawing here. But my point is, he does use two words for love here. When Jesus says, "Do you love me?" he uses the word agape. When Peter responds with the word love, it's phileo. Agape is considered as the eternal love, the sacrificial love, the love that God has for us. Phileo, like Philadelphia, what? Friendship, brotherly love, kind of thing. There's a different meaning from its root. And what's very interesting is when Peter responds, it's always phileo, yes, I love you. When Jesus says, "Do you love me?" it's agape. And what's interesting, at the very end, if you were to look at your Greek, when Jesus mentions love, he kind of like compromises to phileo. Very interesting. I do think that John himself is making a distinction here. Okay? And we'll talk about that. So, when they had finished eating, okay, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know I phileo you. Jesus said what? Okay, then what? Feed my lambs. What is he establishing here, everybody? Peter's what? Starts with a name. I already said this. His apostleship. Right. Right. All right. So, and he's also establishing the office of holy ministry. But we as pastors are not apostles. We make that distinction very clear because the apostles have an authority. That's why we speak in our confession. It's why we believe in the apostolic church, because we believe that the apostles were given that authority, right? So he's establishing, and what is he saying here? Then he moves to an action. If you love me, and Kathy, to your point, then now this is what you do. This is going to be your job. You're going to have to feed my lambs, which is feed the church, the people in the church. Right? They just got done with a fish dinner, or fish breakfast, I should say, right? See that? There's such connections here. Now it's going to be your job to spiritually feed those who are going to be converted, right? Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly agape me? All right? I don't know where Peter's at now. It's like, okay, I thought I was clear the first time, but I'm going to, okay. Yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. All right? You're my buddy. I think he feels more than that, but still there's a distinction here.
If he's understanding the meaning of the words, he's also got to be thinking back to the denial.
Well, that's where we're getting at. Yeah, absolutely. That's where we're getting at.
And maybe Jesus pointed out that you cannot agape.
I agree. It could be, well, maybe in the end, yeah, it troubles me that he finishes with the label. Yes. And maybe that's it.
Well, I don't know the full meaning of agape, but if it's a sacrificial type love that like God has for us, is that something we can even do?
No, we can't match love with God, and that could be could be the point.
So possibly it's, guys, this is as good as you're going to get is to lay love
Right.
for each other.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this point, if you read the commentaries, there's some difference in what's going on but what you just hit is where we're going. And that's the main thing. Not everybody agrees with, but the main thing is, okay, second time, right? And then what does he say? First feed my lambs, then what? Take care of my sheep. Be a shepherd. What did he say in the book of John? I am the great, one of his 7 I ams is I am the
good
shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. Right? And what do people call pastors? Well, pastor, the whole idea of pastor is shepherd. We're supposed to be under shepherds of the great shepherd. Right? Yes. So Jesus says, take care of my sheep. The third time he asks Simon, do you love me? And now Peter gets it. I see where this is going, Lord. Now remember, the first thing this is not where Jesus starts off with Peter. The first thing Jesus said when he showed himself as the resurrected Christ, which he is now, is what? He said what? Peace be with you. Peace be with you. I forgive you. I'm not trying to chastise you here. But we now have to talk about this, right? Almost like when you raise your children and you have an episode, right? And again, a climax in the episode where, maybe I raise my voice, or maybe I have to punish my child with something that equals the crime, because, right, all that stuff happens. And you ever have that talk with a kid afterwards, after your child, especially if there's forgiveness involved, and the kid goes, sorry, Dad. And then you sit down and you talk, and then you're still going to say the reason why. You're not going to try to rub it in. That's not the point, right? But you surely do want your child to know why you said, no, you're not going to be able to go to that party now. And I know you don't understand now, but, and then if you reach a certain point of understanding later on, they're going to learn the lesson, and they're going to appreciate you more, and respect you more, and they're going to do the same thing with their kid, hopefully, right? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, this is beautiful. You know all things. I love this part. So it's like Peter goes, here's my thought. It's like, no, I know I love you. I think you guys would say the same thing. If God was right here today and he came to you, let's say the person of Christ came back to you. Let's say it came in a dream. Let's make it these two. He comes to you in a dream. He says, Jamie, do you love me? David, do you love me? There you go. Put your name in there. What would you say? What would you say to God?
Yes.
I would say yes too, because I do. I do. With all my heart, I know I love him. I know I love God. Right? And, if he asks me again, okay, he knows where he's getting at, okay? And now he knows he's talking about the denial 3 times, right? But still Peter now goes, you know all things. So it's as if Peter is saying, I do love you. I'm a messed up guy. I blew it, right? But I still love you. I do love you. And you know all things. He's calling on the divine wisdom of God and knowledge of God, right? And I think he's being very sincere here. Saying, you know all things. He says, you know I love you, Lord. Even though I messed up. Right? Now, couldn't that be, isn't that a beautiful thing? To know you love the Lord, you do love your Lord. Even though you're a sinner, God has given you this. Every one of us loves God. And we can actually come to him in spite of ourselves that way. And still recognize we do love God. And isn't that part of the reason why you go to a confession and say, Lord, I blew it. I love you. I'm sorry, I blew it again. And that's all part of your actual confession. Right? I think that's what he's doing here. And I would have to call on that. And I don't have to question the love of God, but Lord, I do love you, right? I mean, I really, and there's just such a sense of honesty here from Peter. Mm-hmm.
I think he's saying that he knew that God knew, even when he was denying, that God knew that he still loved him.
Uh-huh.
He was
still had faith,
scared,
right?
he still had faith.
Right.
Whereas Judas, with the way he leads in his is not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And because the devil entered into him, so we assume that he did not love Jesus any longer.
Yep.
But Peter did, even though he denied. Jesus knew that that faith, that
There was
love
faith.
still
That's
there.
right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And there's that distinction as made between Judas and Peter. The penalty, that what they did wasn't any different. But one did have faith. And one had the ability, by the grace of God, to confess and repent. And that's the difference. Right? You can have what's called contrition, which is what Judas and Peter both had contrition. If you have contrition, it's you feel bad that you did what you did. But that alone is not faith. And that alone is not repentance. So they both had what's called contrition. But Peter did have a love for his Lord. And there was faith there, which is synonymous with the love. See how that works? Yeah, that's right. And that's coming through here. Mm-hmm. You know all things. Then Jesus says, once again, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, here we go. Now is a prophecy. In other words, you're going to feed my sheep. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And John gives us the clear interpretation right here, so we don't have to figure out what it is. Jesus said, indicated this to tell him what kind of death in which Peter would glorify God. And the historians will tell you that Peter ended up about 30 years after this point right here, about 30 years later, he was crucified, just like his Lord. And if history is correct, he asked to be crucified upside down because he didn't want the honor of dying like his Lord. So he was crucified upside down. Okay? He was willing to die for his Savior by way of crucifixion. Compare that to the denying Jesus over it. Okay? And you have a different hope, and you have a faith that's mature and one that just is going to go ahead and give up this life for the one to come. Beautiful thing. So the course of those 30 years. Okay? Peter turned and saw that the disciples whom Jesus was, this is kind of funny, was following them. John cracks me up. He spends so many words on himself. Just say it was me. It's interesting how this one works, though. So were they walking? Were they like walking? Did they kind of separate themselves? It sounds like, right? Was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw John, he said, "Lord, what about him?" I think this is funny. You know, what about old John over there? I got beat up. What about you? What about John? What's going to happen to him? This is kind of interesting too. What happens? Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return," what's he talking about there? His second coming. If I wanted that, what is that to you, Peter? In other words, Peter, don't worry about it. And none of your business. None of your business. Yeah.
And when it is, I'll let you know.
Yeah. And that's a good lesson to learn too, isn't it? And then because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say this. Remember, this is John speaking about himself, so clarifying these things. All right, the rumor went out that this happened, but Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return," oh, what is that to you? Well, we have the answer because it's 2,000 years later and Jesus has not returned yet. So this is, simple for us. But what's really interesting is who was the one disciple, according to history, that did not get martyred.
John.
John. He had
Yeah, also,
exiled.
didn't he live the longest?
He did.
Yeah.
He
He lived in the
definitely-
90s, didn't
Well,
he? 80 or 90?
probably
Somewhere
because
in that region.
he was exiled, so he did get exiled to the island of Patmos, which he wrote. That's where he ate some poison mushrooms and ate them. Wrote about the book of Revelation. You would think that, right? Not poison, but psychedelic mushrooms. I just had a feeling that he was like, he sat down and saw some mushrooms, ate them, and went, "Oh, I'm going to write about the prophecy of God." I'm going to see monsters coming out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. And I'm going to see them come, and there's going to be these giant bees with sting, and they're going to use scorpions, and you think he ate some bad mushrooms. Or good ones. Yes.
Do you think Peter's a little bit still concerned about who's going to be at the right hand? Like the question he asked earlier about who's going to be at the right hand to me, because isn't it him, John, and then because he's thinking Jesus just told me I'm going to die, and now he's afraid maybe John is going to get a better deal.
I don't know. I would hope not, but you never know, right? So think with human being. I would
Just
hope
seemed like a
you.
close connection.
Mm-hmm.
Right after he tells Peter he's going to die,
Yeah.
he wants to know what's
What's going on with
John.
John? Yeah. And after that, let me hear
Yeah.
back with Thomas and other boys. Yeah.
Because he emphasizes that this is the one who was close to him
Mm-hmm.
at the table, the one that I think maybe John keeps saying the beloved disciple, because maybe if John never said that
Right.
about
Who was
himself,
the one who
we
clearly?
would think Peter would be.
Well, who was the one who clearly asked to sit at the right and left? It was John and James, his brother, and not only that, their mother got involved in the act. Remember that? So if there's anyone who really tried hard to be the right, now they all talked about it. They all talked about it. But there's the incidents of John and James saying to Jesus, "Hey, we want to be on the right and left." Remember that? And we just had that a little while ago. Right? And Jesus says, "First of all, are you willing to be baptized in the one I'm about to be baptized?" "Oh yeah, we are." "Yeah, you're going to, but it's not yours to say." Okay, so he kind of puts him in the place just like Peter. And then
Now Peter
Mom
knows
gets
how he's
involved.
going to be.
Hmm?
Now Peter knows exactly how he's going to be. He just told him that. Like, he's going to be baptized, he's also going to be crucified.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. Either one of those things, I know I ask this a lot in Bible study, and it's good to ask, but then you have to step back and say, it's kind of interesting, but you know what? The text doesn't tell us.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to kind of sit back. And for me, I always think when I'd like to kind of maybe go a little farther and fantasize, what do you think is going on here? And the text isn't telling me. Other times the text is actually telling me. So there's those things in Christianity where I think I'm willing to fall on my sword for, and there are those things that I believe that I'm not willing to fall on my sword for, and those things exist in me, and right. So that's one of those things. You can speculate, but who knows? I would hope that at this point Peter is at a very humble moment too. But he does say, "What about John?" Yeah, I don't know. Good point.
I also have an interesting thought. Because the Catholics think that the whole thing starts on Peter.
Right.
Is maybe this significant that John also includes himself, so that it's not just Peter that receives the ministry, that receives the go and feed my lambs.
I don't know. I think a Catholic would look at this and connect it to Matthew 16. Matthew 16, when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You're the Christ." And the big difference between us is right there. We say the subject matter is the confession, and they say, no, Peter is the rock. Peter actually means rock, which is true. And so there you have the Pope. And I would suggest, if I'm a Catholic reading this, I would suggest this is more proof in the context why why Jesus is singling Peter out here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like, I wonder.
So that they might read that and say, see, this is more singling out Peter as being the first pope, right?
Because like in Matthew, it's in 28, when he says, go and make disciples,
Right.
it's as if he's talking to all of them.
Right.
And here, it's very just Peter. But then Peter is the one that says, well, what about John? So maybe this is a slight indication that it's not just Peter. John also has.
For defense of our position?
No, not necessarily defense of our position, but
I don't know.
that they.
Yeah, I think he might be stretching a little bit here. Don't you think? I mean, it's what we do say is the authority of the apostles went to all of them equally, right? And the ones we hear about mostly is Peter and basically Paul and John, who writes in there, you know. So, yeah.
Maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but it doesn't say where the rest of the disciples are. Apparently Jesus and Peter took a walk.
Right.
Peter turns, he sees John, and if he understood what Jesus just said, which is basically, you're going to die a horrible death too, and if you cared about other people and you saw John following, I think it'd be a natural thing to say, what about him? Because we're all heading down the same path here.
Yeah.
And it seems kind of natural that you just kind of got told by Jesus, you're going to, the end's not going to be good. It's not going to be fun.
Right.
And if you loved your brothers, the first one you saw, you might ask that question. What about him? What about, it could have been any one of the five.
Yeah.
Happening to John.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, good point. It just occurred to me now as you were talking that, yeah, Peter would have then known that he was going to have to die before Jesus returns. You know?
Isn't that kind of maybe a sign of maturity in Peter, though? Isn't the reason God doesn't tell us what the future is going to hold is because that would mess with our minds and and apparently Jesus knew Peter could handle it, or he would have told him, right?
That's true. Yeah. And at the same time, when he requested other people, he then said, you're not, so there's still a little bit, yeah.
And John wouldn't have known, except John kept following him along.
Yeah. Unless they talk afterwards, they go, don't have any Jesus had something. Interesting. Yeah.
That's also the thing he was afraid of when he denied.
Hmm?
So when he denied, that's what he was running away from. Was being
Yes, yeah, that's
Jesus.
right. Yeah, that's kind of the point I was making, that pre-resurrected Christ, you got, I don't want to be martyred, I don't want to be a part of this, and he's scared stiff, and then he ends up, dying for the faith. Yeah. The resurrection, in fact, that's one of the things when you hear people talking about the resurrection, is the people. I mean, the disciples, this is where they got it. After the resurrected Christ, they were willing to do anything. They were willing to be tortured and die for Jesus. They were totally different here, and they became the apostles. Yes. Yes. Okay. This is, okay, here's his conclusion. This is the disciple who testified to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the book that would be written. I think he kind of ends with a little bit of a hyperbole there. Rita, you were about to say something?
No, I agree.
Yeah. So he was kind of using hyperbole. In other words, what I could have told you so much more, and that's true, by the way. All the disciples, all these books, when you take all four Gospels, they're only writing what it is that God directed them to write, by way of the Holy Spirit. Jesus would have done a whole bunch of other things that we don't even know, but the Bible isn't written so that we have to know everything about what God did, but they're all structured in a certain way to make their points. And they're structured towards an audience, which I will then end with this and go back to the themes. Now that we've gone through the entire book, remember the themes. That you may believe. We just talked about it. That's one of the themes. I'm writing this so that you may believe Jesus is the Christ. All right? The other theme, remember, had to do with what? His conversations with people all along the way were those two claims. Remember we started with that? He has a conversation with the woman at the well, Nicodemus, all the people. He's what? He's trying with the rubber band to stretch them to the spiritual. He's speaking spiritually, and the person down here is having a hard time because he's on the earthly level, right? And ultimately, these earthly miracles that benefited their daily bread, their bodies, their lives here on earth, ultimately have to bow down to the ultimate miracle. So, yes, I feed all these people. Yes, I gave sight to the blind. Yes, I turned water into wine. Yes, all these things. I even raised Lazarus from the dead. But ultimately, you're going to have to let all these miracles point to me as the Christ, and the ultimate miracle is the one of dying and rising from this world to the next. Right? The stretch. The conversations were the same way. It was the miracle, same thing. Earthly miracle, divine reason for it. Can you stretch yourself to that? Which means you're going to have to deny yourself and understand that the ultimate miracle is what? Dying and resurrecting. Okay? Conversation, same thing. Miracle or conversations. When we had with Mary at the changing the water into wine. It's not my hour yet. A little bit of, okay, I'll give you the wine, but it's not my hour yet. Keep that in mind, Mary, Mom, Mary. He didn't say Mom there, he said woman, right? Keep in mind, I am the bread of life. I did feed your stomachs, but can you understand the stretching, right? And that's the point. And that's what he's teaching us when we read this, right? Number 3, remember the lightness and darkness part. Again, if you ever read through, if you wanted to read through the whole book of John, that might not be a bad idea. Sit down and just, pour a cup of coffee or whatever, read the book of John, and just remember those themes as they went through when they were there. The light and darkness through the whole thing. Darkness always meant what? Unbelief. Unbelief. Right? All the way from the prologue, right? In the beginning, the light, and then the darkness, and all the way through. Even to the end when, in the darkness, Mary Magdalene, right, didn't, even though she thought he was the gardener. Alright? And in darkness just wanted to have a proper burial of Jesus when he was resurrected. See, that's just beautiful. They're always in contrast with each other, lightness and dark. And do you agree with me that this is the most simplest? It's simply stated, but yet what? It's so simple that a child can wade in it, yet it's so deep that an elephant can drown in it. Didn't that prove to be so? Yes, it's an amazing book. An amazing book. How John writes. And then the 5th one was really synonymous with the other one. We ascend to the greatest miracle of all. And I think that's most important for me to tell myself, because it's very hard for me sometimes to accept, but it is the truth that if we can accept that we are dying with Christ in order to rise with Him, all my problems, pains, and sufferings, and disappointments will be put in a different category. I will look at them differently. I'll be able to handle them better. If I don't take my blessings that I have here and turn them into idols. Once I turn my blessings that I have here, even though there's some really good blessings that I have, if I turn them into an idol, that's the one, that's when I'm going to get really hurt. Okay? Your comments, yes?
Okay, so I was going through the files. Didn't Pastor Shoemaker do a sermon a couple years ago probably longer than that, where he said some of the scholars refer to the 53 fish, the 153, that's how many different groups or tribes were on the earth at that time.
Oh,
It's
that would
the number
coincide
of
then.
species of
I think
fish.
I ever heard something like, or species of fish. Well, there would have been different.
There was,
species. Yeah, I think I heard you say that one too, yeah. That would be
I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
you know, it's ringing a bell.
Okay.
Don't discourage Renee from doing her study.
I'm waiting to hear the answer in the fall.
Okay, 153 different, like, cultures.
Like groups of people on the earth at that time.
Wow, I think I remember that now, yeah.
It is so
Okay.
familiar.
That would be cool. You want to be that?
And they got along better than we do now.
Huh?
And they got along better than we do now from the stories.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Only temporarily, they have more stories.
Yeah.
always. All right, anybody else? It's been a wonderful study. Thanks for taking this journey with me. And we'll get back in the fall with something, okay? Probably late September, early October. All right, let's pray. Dear Father, thank you for taking us through this wonderful gospel and for enlightening us with your wisdom and your care for us. And I pray that we will continue to study your word so that we may believe that you are the Christ in opposition to all the nasty stuff that goes on in this world and those things that will take us from you. Help us to always recognize that you do seek after us. You are the good shepherd. And with that, I pray that you would always help us to be your followers in a way that would make us content in life, regardless of the situation. That the resurrected Christ will